They didn't leave because you weren't enough. They left because what you gave felt unfamiliar, too steady, too real, too consistent. And at the time, their nervous system didn't know how to hold that. So they did what they've always done. They pulled away, created distance, convinced themselves it wasn't right. But now, something is changing. Because life has a way of doing what you didn't. It removes the noise, the distractions, the temporary highs. And what's left is contrast. And contrast is what creates clarity. Because after they left, they didn't find you again. They found patterns, the same emotional cycles, the same intensity followed by distance, the same excitement followed by exhaustion. And this isn't coincidence. It's conditioning. Avoidant attachment is not just behavior, it's a nervous system loop. Studies in attachment psychology show that avoidants are wired to seek connection, but withdraw when that connection becomes stable. Not because stability is bad, but because it feels unfamiliar. And the brain is biased toward what is familiar, even if it's unhealthy. So they gravitate toward dynamics that match their internal wiring. Uncertainty, distance, emotional inconsistency. Because that's what their system knows how to regulate. But over time, that kind of connection comes with a cost. Chronic stress, emotional fatigue, mental overload. Because the body is constantly switching between activation and withdrawal. Cortisol rises, drops, rises again. And this repeated cycle creates something deeper than just emotional confusion. It creates burnout, and burnout forces reflection. Because eventually, the nervous system starts rejecting what it once tolerated. This is where you come back into their awareness. Not because you reached out, not because you chased. They didn't leave because you were lacking. They left because what you gave them didn't match what their nervous system was trained to understand. And that difference felt uncomfortable, not painful in an obvious way, but unfamiliar in a deeper biological way. Because the human brain doesn't automatically move toward what's healthy. It moves toward what's known. Even if what's known is unstable, even if what's known is inconsistent, even if what's known slowly drains you. Familiarity feels like safety to the brain, and that's where the mistake begins. Because what you offered wasn't familiar. You were consistent. You were calm. You didn't create emotional spikes. You didn't pull away to create tension. You didn't force closeness either. You existed in balance. And balance is not something an avoidant nervous system easily recognizes, because their entire pattern is built on contrast. Closeness followed by distance. Interest followed by withdrawal. That's where connection followed by control. And their brain learns to regulate within that cycle. It becomes their normal. So when that pattern is missing, something feels off. Not wrong, just different. And different can feel unsafe when the brain doesn't have a reference for it. Neuroscience explains this clearly. The brain uses past experiences to predict future outcomes. It builds models of what relationships should feel like. And when something doesn't match that model, it triggers uncertainty. And uncertainty activates the brain's threat detection system. The amygdala starts scanning, looking for reasons, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar. And when it can't, it leans toward protection, distance, detachment, withdrawal. Not because you did something wrong, but because your presence didn't fit their internal map. And that creates a quiet kind of tension, the kind that isn't expressed openly, the kind that shows up as slow replies, subtle distance, emotional inconsistency. And from your perspective, it feels confusing, because everything you're doing is stable, healthy, clear. But from their perspective, it's uncharted territory. And the brain doesn't relax in uncharted territory. It prepares. Because uncertainty in biological terms has always meant potential risk. So instead of leaning in, they step back. Not permanently, but enough to restore a sense of control. Because control reduces uncertainty. And uncertainty is what their system is trying to avoid. So they return to what feels normal. Dynamics with more intensity, more unpredictability, more emotional movement. Because even though those patterns are unstable, they are familiar. And familiarity lowers cognitive load. The brain doesn't have to work as hard to interpret it. It knows what to expect. It knows how to respond, even if the outcome isn't ideal. But here's where time changes everything. Because repeated exposure to unstable dynamics has a cost, not just emotionally, but physiologically. Every cycle of uncertainty increases stress hormones. Cortisol spikes. Heart rate variability decreases. The body stays in a semi-activated state. And over time, that creates fatigue, mental exhaustion, emotional burnout. Because the nervous system is not designed to stay in constant fluctuation. It needs stability to recover. And when it doesn't get that stability, it starts searching for it, not consciously, but biologically. This is where your memory returns, not as nostalgia, but as contrast. Because now their brain has something to compare. It has experienced both ends of the spectrum, the unstable and the stable. And neuroscience shows that the brain constantly evaluates experiences through comparison, where it asks what required more energy, what felt more sustainable, what reduced stress, and slowly the answer becomes clear. You did. Not because you were more exciting, not because you tried harder, but because you required less emotional effort to be around, less mental calculation, less defensive behavior, less regulation. And that matters more than people realize, because the brain is always moving toward efficiency. It prefers what costs less energy to maintain, and stable connection costs less than chaotic connection. So what once felt unfamiliar starts to feel valuable. What once felt too calm starts to feel like relief. And relief is powerful, because relief signals safety. And safety is what the nervous system has been trying to find all along, but couldn't recognize at the time, because it didn't match the original pattern. And this is the moment the realization begins. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, quietly. They start remembering how interactions with you felt, not what you said, not what you did, but how their body responded, calmer, less tense, less guarded. And those sensations matter more than words, because the body stores experience differently than the mind. It remembers feelings, states, energy. And when those states are compared to current experiences, the difference becomes undeniable. And that difference creates awareness. That what they left was not the problem. It was the solution they didn't understand yet. But here's the truth that completes the picture. You didn't change. Your value didn't increase after they left. Your stability was always there. They just couldn't see it, because their system wasn't ready to recognize it. And readiness matters, because people don't receive things based on their value. They receive things based on their capacity. And when capacity grows, perception changes. What once felt uncomfortable now feels necessary. What once felt unfamiliar now feels rare. And that's why they come back. Not because you became more, but because they can finally see what you were. And that realization doesn't come from emotion. It comes from experience, from living through what you were not, from feeling the cost of instability, from recognizing the difference between intensity and peace. And once that recognition happens, it doesn't go away, because the brain doesn't forget contrast. It stores it, uses it, builds future decisions around it. So when they think of you now, it's not through the same lens. It's clearer, more grounded, more aware of what was actually there. And that awareness is what pulls them back. Not impulse, not loneliness, but recognition that what you offered was something their system needed, even when it didn't know how to accept it. At first, it doesn't feel like a loss. It feels like relief, space, control, silence where there used to be expectation. And for an avoidant nervous system, that silence feels like safety, because there's no pressure anymore. No one waiting, no one needs, no one pulling them closer than they're ready to go. And in that moment, everything feels right. But the human nervous system doesn't judge experiences in the moment. It evaluates them over time. And time has a way of revealing what adrenaline hides. Because what feels like relief in the beginning can slowly turn into something else entirely. Emptiness. And not the peaceful kind. The kind that creeps in quietly. When the noise fades. When the distractions lose their intensity. When the emotional spikes that once felt exciting start to feel exhausting. Because after they leave, they don't just lose you. They return to patterns, familiar ones, unpredictable ones, connections that start fast, feel intense, and then collapse under their own weight. And at first it feels normal because it matches their internal wiring. Closeness followed by distance, interest followed by withdrawal, the same rhythm they've always known. But here's what most people don't realize. That rhythm comes at a biological cost. Every time the brain experiences emotional uncertainty, where it activates a stress response, cortisol increases, the heart rate fluctuates, the body moves between activation and deactivation states. And when this happens repeatedly, the system doesn't just adapt, it wears down. Studies in chronic stress show that repeated emotional inconsistency can dysregulate the nervous system, leading to increased anxiety, mental fatigue, and reduced emotional resilience. In simple terms, what once felt exciting starts to feel draining. but the brain doesn't notice it immediately because dopamine masks it. Those unpredictable moments of attention, those short bursts of connection, they create spikes of reward. And those spikes keep the cycle going. Just like a slot machine, you don't win every time, but you win just enough to keep playing. And over time, that creates dependency, not on the person, but on the pattern, the highs, the lows, the anticipation, the temporary relief. And this is where the shift begins, because eventually the cost becomes greater than the reward. The body starts rejecting the cycle. Sleep becomes inconsistent. Focus drops. Emotional tolerance decreases. Small things start to feel overwhelming. And that's when the brain starts searching for contrast, not consciously, but biologically, because the nervous system is always trying to regulate itself, trying to find balance, trying to return to baseline. And when it's been stuck in instability for too long, it begins to remember what stability felt like. This is where you come back into the picture, not through messages, not through reminders, but through comparison, because the brain always compares current experiences to past ones. And when the present feels chaotic, it looks for moments that felt different, moments that required less effort, less defense, less emotional calculation. And that's where your memory becomes powerful, because what you gave them wasn't intensity, it was ease. And ease is something the nervous system recognizes over time, not immediately, but gradually, because ease doesn't spike dopamine. It doesn't create dramatic highs. It doesn't demand attention, but it does something more important. It allows recovery. It gives the nervous system space to rest, to breathe, to exist without constant adjustment. And after experiencing repeated instability, that kind of connection becomes valuable, not because it's exciting, but because it's sustainable. And sustainability is what the body starts craving, because the brain doesn't just want stimulation. It wants survival. It wants balance. And when it doesn't get that balance, it starts searching for it. So they begin to think about you, not emotionally at first, but physiologically, through memory, through sensation. The way their body felt when they were around you, calmer, less tense, less guarded. And those sensations matter more than logic, because the body processes experience faster than the mind. It doesn't need explanations. It remembers states. And when those states are compared to current experiences, the difference becomes undeniable, and that difference creates awareness, that what they left wasn't lacking, it was stabilizing. But here's the deeper layer. This awareness doesn't come with immediate action, because recognizing something and being ready for it are two different things. Their system may now understand the value of what you offered, but it doesn't mean it can fully hold it yet, because patterns don't disappear overnight. Neural pathways built over years don't rewire instantly. But awareness creates tension, a gap between what they experience and what they now know is possible. And that gap is uncomfortable because it forces reflection. Why does everything else feel heavier? Why do these connections feel more draining? Why did that one feel easier? And those questions don't go away because the brain seeks resolution. It wants to close the gap between understanding and experience. And that's what pulls them back. Not just emotion, not just memory, but the need to reconcile that difference. To experience again what felt different, to see if it still feels the same, to test whether that sense of ease was real. And this is where everything becomes clear. They didn't come back because they were bored. They didn't come back because they had no options. They came back because their nervous system felt the cost of everything else, and finally recognized the value of what you gave. But here's the truth that matters most. Their return is not proof that they've changed. It's proof that they've noticed, and noticing is the first step, not the final one, because change requires more than awareness. It requires new behavior, new regulation, new patterns, and that takes time. So the real question isn't why they came back. The real question is what you do when they do, because the same system that once couldn't hold your stability is now trying to re-enter it. And if nothing has changed, the same cycle will repeat. But if you remain the same, grounded, regulated, unmoved by emotional urgency, then something different can happen. Not because you forced it, but because you didn't lose yourself in it. And that's the only thing that truly changes the outcome. Not their return, but your stability when they do. They're coming back. And everything inside you wants to believe this time will be different, that the distance changed them, that the silence made them realize, that now, finally, they see you clearly. But here's the part most people don't understand. Their return doesn't test them. It tests you. Because nothing reveals your growth more than the moment something familiar comes back into your life, carrying the same energy it always had, and your nervous system reacts instantly. Not logically, not calmly, but automatically. Your heart rate shifts, your thoughts accelerate, your body remembers before your mind does. Because memory isn't just stored in thoughts, it's stored in the nervous system, in patterns, in emotional responses that were repeated over time, and when something familiar reappears, those patterns reactivate. This is called neural reactivation. The brain reopens old pathways that were once dominant. And if those pathways are still strong, you don't respond as the person you are now. You respond as the person you were then. That's why this moment matters more than anything that happened before. Because this is where identity is either reinforced or redefined. If you rush, if you overinvest, if you seek clarity too quickly, you're not responding from growth. You're responding from memory, from old conditioning, from a version of you that learned to equate connection with urgency. And the brain rewards that urgency. It releases dopamine when you anticipate reconnection. It creates a sense of relief when communication resumes. And that relief feels like progress. But it's not. It's repetition. Because the same pattern is starting again. And patterns don't change unless behavior changes. Not theirs, yours. Because your behavior determines the dynamic you participate in. And this is where most people lose their position. They forget what made them different. They forget the stability they once had, the calm, the grounded presence, the lack of emotional urgency. And they trade it for hope. Hope that this time will be easier. Hope that this time will last. Hope that this time will feel the way it always should have. But hope without awareness becomes vulnerability. And vulnerability without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. So the real power in this moment is not emotional. It's physiological. Because your ability to stay grounded is not just about mindset. It's about regulation. Your nervous system must remain stable under pressure. Because pressure is what triggers old patterns. And that stability is influenced by more than just your thoughts. It's influenced by your body, your sleep, your stress levels, your daily habits, even what you consume. Research shows that poor sleep increases amygdala reactivity by up to 60%, meaning your brain becomes more sensitive to emotional triggers, more reactive, less controlled. The blood sugar instability can increase irritability, anxiety, and impulsive decision-making. Deficiencies in nutrients like magnesium and omega-3 fatty acids are linked to increased stress response and reduced emotional regulation. This isn't just psychology, it's biology. If your body is unstable, your emotions will be too. And in moments like this, that instability shows up in how quickly you respond, in how much you invest, in how easily you slip back into old dynamics. But when your system is regulated, everything slows down. You don't rush. You don't react impulsively. You don't feel the need to secure the connection immediately. You observe. You assess. You stay present without losing control. And that's what protects you. Because now, you're not operating from the past. You're operating from awareness. You're no longer trying to recreate what once existed. You're evaluating what exists now. Is there consistency? Is there effort? Is there change? And most importantly, does this align with who you've become? Because if it doesn't, then nothing else matters. Not the history, not the connection, not the emotion. Because alignment determines sustainability. And sustainability is what your nervous system actually needs. Not intensity, not temporary closeness, not emotional highs followed by distance, but stability. And that's what you have to maintain. Because the moment you abandon that stability, you lose what made you rare. You become predictable again. Emotionally available without boundaries, reactive to inconsistency, pulled by uncertainty, and the entire dynamic resets. But if you remain grounded, if you stay regulated, if you don't rush the process, something different happens. The dynamic slows down. Pressure doesn't build. Space remains intact. And now they have to meet you where you are, not where you used to be. And that's where real change can happen. Not through words, not through promises, but through behavior over time. Because behavior is the only thing that rewires patterns. Consistency is the only thing that rebuilds trust. And time is the only thing that reveals truth. So your job is not to decide quickly, not to assume, not to hope, but to watch. To stay in control of your responses. To maintain your internal state regardless of what they do. Because that's what separates growth from repetition. And here's the truth that brings it all together. Their return is not the reward. Your stability is. Because if you can remain yourself in the presence of something that once disrupted you, then you've already won. Not them, not the relationship, but yourself. And once you have that, you don't need to chase outcomes. You don't need to force clarity. You don't need to hold on to something uncertain because you trust your ability to walk away if it no longer aligns. And that trust is what makes everything different this time. Not their presence, but your response to it.